Steely Dan interview for Kamikiriad. Variously jet-lagged and eyeing each other guardedly from behind their paper plates and coffee cups, half a dozen representatives of the world's rock press settled down in the plushy, efficient confines of Riversound Studios, different floors above East 95th Street in Manhattan, to hear the first playback of the studio's co-owner's new album. No big deal, except that soundtrack hat were apart, the co-owner in question hasn't released an album of original material in 11 years. A ridiculous career hiatus, even for an artist as famously reclusive as Donald Fagen. Fagen's partner in Riversound is Gary Katz, an associate from way back, whose enduring claim to fame is that he produced the entire Steely Dan oeuvre, as well as Fagen's 1982 solo album, The Nightfly. In an adding twist to the reclusive singer's re-emergence, however, Katz has been passed over for production duties on Kamikiriad, the belated follow-up, in favour of Fagen's old songwriting partner in the Dan, Walter Becker, who also plays all bass and lead guitar parts, which makes the release of Kamikiriad the first concrete evidence of the long-rumoured Steely Dan reunion, and thus an event of some note for music lovers of taste and distinction the world over. As the opening track, Trans-Island Skyway, slides smoothly from the monitors, so close is the style to the exquisite jazz pop of his solo debut that it sounds as if Donald Fagen had finished working on The Nightfly one day and started recording Kamikiriad the very next. Well, I did actually, quips Fagen dryly a little later when we meet in his manager's office outside the St. Patrick's Day parade is battling its way through the snowdrifts down Fifth Avenue, bringing an even worse level of traffic chaos to this routinely gridlocked city. Fagen is late because of it, but at least he's here. A few weeks earlier, another Q journalist spent 4 hours sitting in the same office, vainly waiting for him to show up. No, he continues, I think it's different from the Nightfly in a number of ways. It's more aggressive as far as the rhythms go. I write in a certain style, which I don't know how much I could depart from. It's the natural way I play the piano and derive the harmonies. I'm not interested in any kind of radical departure unless it comes naturally. Otherwise, it would just be pretentious. But I think it's a much more mature album. He's right about the rhythms, but only just. More noticeable is the fuller sound of the horn arrangements, which, for the first time, Fagen did all on his own. There are more horn players on the album, 11 in fact, than all the other musicians put together, continuing the incursion of jazz moods and textures that have proliferated in Fagen's work, particularly through the last few Steely Dan albums into his solo career. The most fundamental shift is in the lyrics, however, where the Nightfly offered a sentimentally ironic view of the recent past. Kamikiriad offers a less sentimental but similarly ironic postulation of the new future. Yeah, I think that's true, Fagen agrees. I also could add that I sometimes think of the Steely Dan records as being a kind of running commentary on the present as it was occurring. So it's kind of a trilogy, if you look at it that way. In the first track, the narrator takes delivery of his new steam-powered Kamikiriad. The frame is out of Glasgow, the tech is Balinese. A mobile biophonic complete with hydroponic farm and sets up the Trans-Island Skyway to 5 zoos where that neon sun is blinding. The tide pools are boiling. The rest of the album follows him as he continues his journey through this luxuriously ravaged future landscape, eventually arriving in the concluding tea house on the tracks in bleak Flytown, out where hope and the highway ends. It's a more in-depth exercising of the sci-fi themes that cropped up occasionally on Steely Dan's songs such as Signing Stranger and King of the World, with a fashionable greenish tinge. Fagen admits to an enduring interest in science fiction of the speculative rather than space opera variety, traceable to a childhood more set up of a sci-fi book club, which put him into contact with his imagination.
Fagen admits to an enduring interest in science fiction of the speculative rather than space opera variety, traceable to a childhood membership of a sci-fi book club, which brought him into contact with the figured imaginations of such as Heinlein, Dick, Bester, and Van Voigt. Terrible writers for the most part, but great ideas men. I haven't kept up with it that much lately, he admits, though I have read a few of the William Gibson books, which I find I like the Alfred Bester stuff I used to read. I always like the idea of total freedom that science fiction allows as regards plotting and characters, and the way you can come up with ideas that have no way of being executed now. I thought it was a good premise to build the story on, because I didn't want to refer to anything that's happening now, even though, in a way, it is probably more about the present than the future. For Fagen, the immediate future holds the prospect of more promotional interviews, for which he clearly finds it difficult to summon much enthusiasm, and a projected Steely Dan tour in the autumn, featuring a few old faves and tracks from his solo albums and Walter's own, which his partner is presently finishing in Hawaii with Gary Katz. Then again, Dan fans have grown used to the frequent promises of tours. In fact, the group haven't played live since 1974, though both Becker and Fagen have appeared at New York Rock and Soul Review concerts over the past few years, in the company of such as Boz Scaggs, Phoebe Snow, and the old Dan compadre Mike McDonald. The immediate past, though, has not been a particularly happy or productive time for Fagen. I realise I have the same problem as Prince, that I'm too prolific. He notes sardonically, adding a short, truncated bark of amusement that creases this sourest that passes. Pusses, sourest that pusses for only a briefest moment before vanishing completely. Apart from the New York Rock and Soul Review appearances, he spent much of the 80s scraping around at a variety of jobs. Soundtrack work for films like Bright Lights, Big City was less than fulfilling, especially given the lack of creative control afforded by the movie business. And a short stint as Premiere Magazine's movie music correspondent was abandoned when he began writing songs again. More importantly, Fagen went through a classic midlife crisis. I wanted to do an autobiographical album, and I really put everything I knew into the Night Flight album, he recalls. And after that, I really wasn't inspired to do anything. I fell into a bit of a depression for a while, and I started going to therapy. I think that, like a lot of artists, especially in the music business, I was young and successful, and I was basically still an adolescent. I think I was trying to get out of that with the Nightfly. It was a kind of self-examination of my childhood. As he explains this difficult period in his life, the gentle table tapping with which uh, he eases his discomfort rises to a manic tattoo. Uh, I started to address some of these things, and I got really scared after it was done. I felt I'd exposed myself in a way that I wasn't used to doing, and I kind of retreated psychologically from that. I found that there was a price to pay for exposing my inner life in that way, as guarded as it may seem. But nevertheless, there it was. It comes as a considerable shock to find that this seemingly smartest of smart asses, one of the more cultured and legendary cynical of rock musicians, should experience exactly the same self-doubts and personal crises as the rest of us, though in retrospect maybe he and his partner were always riding for a fall. To be an unerringly honest about human motivation as they were in their songs must have taken its toll on their own sensibility. I worked every day, he continues, but I didn't like what I was doing. I'd play the songs back the next day, didn't much like them. I also studied composition and I practiced the piano a lot. It took me a long time to go through a kind of transformation. Till around 86, 87, I felt I had some energy and some new things to write about. And I basically figured out how to behave, to have a normal life, an actual life, rather than just work. I was I was a workaholic till the end of the Nightfly. The only life I had was in the studio. I would even try to get the engineers to work on Christmas because I was bored if I wasn't working. I think a lot of it had to do with my not wanting to address certain things that I had to address personally, and working gave me the chance not to do any kind of self-examination. I'm a very introspective person, as it is, so I like the action of not always working. It's a kind of therapy in itself. I think everyone has to go through some transformation in the middle of their life and try to accommodate what you think you are to what you came from. That's just how it is. Fagen, of course, wasn't the only one with problems. Around the same time, his old partner, Walter Becker, was reaching the bottom of a spiral which had begun when the pair moved out to Los Angeles in the early 70s to become staff writers for ABC Dunhill, and ended in a messy drug scandal when Becker's girlfriend, Karen Stanley, died from a drug overdose. Her mother tried to sue him on the grounds that it was he who allegedly had introduced her to the drug in the first place. Fagan admits that they were attracted to the California lush life, to the illegal fun under the sun, uh, anatomized so knowingly in the Gaucho album, though he himself moved back east as soon as I had no reason to actually be there. California, I think, was not good for Walter, he assesses tentatively, because he did get into this kind of hedonistic thing for a while, and it took him a long while to get out of it. He was taking drugs, he had all kinds of problems, but I don't know if he would have avoided it if he'd stayed here either. He didn't like himself and was headed for trouble until he had figured it all out. But he's fine now. Since then, Becker has built a reputation as a producer, primarily on new age jazz albums for labels like Windham Hill and Triloka, but also for more mainstream artists such as Ricky Lee Jones. And, in a bizarre lapse of taste, China Crisis. So when Fagan was casting around for a helping hand on his new album, Becker was the obvious choice. I got kind of nervous about handling everything myself, said Fagan, especially the idea of doing vocals and having to come in and listen to them myself. I realised I was really lonely in the studio by myself, without someone to bounce off. So I thought, why break in someone else? if that's even possible. I'll just call him Walter. He was more than a producer, really. He was a collaborator as far as some of the music went, especially in playing. He ended up playing all the bass parts and the lead guitar parts as well. Walter's got a very personal style and he knows exactly what I'm looking for. He has a very stylish way of playing the guitar, which is very swingy and laid back. The kind of thing I like, and he takes some weird chances. Fagen freely admits that the CD boom carried him through his low years as 30-somethings, searching for the most sophisticated discs to try out their new CD systems, kept the Steely Dan back catalogue royalties ticking over nicely. It's their fault that I haven't put out any records, he jokes, though he doesn't pretend to know who buys them. Maybe they sell in the graduating class each year. When Becker and Fagen were themselves graduating from college, the Bohemian Bard College in upstate New York, they already knew they wanted to be songwriters and headed for the legendary home of such great writers partnerships as Jeff Barry and Ella Greenwich, Burt Burns and Jerry McAvoy, and their idols Lieber and Stoller, who had in another earlier era played their own kind of sophisticated games with pop songs, pop forms. By that time, the late 60s, the writer, producer, publisher hegemony over the industry was on the wane, thanks to the body blows dealt by singer-songwriter artists like Dylan and Lennon and McCartney. But it still held a fascination for them. We were into the craft of the thing. We wanted to become great songwriters, he affirms. It was almost over then, but at 1650 Broadway, there were still some things happening. The Loving Spoonful, Buddha Records had an office there, and there was a lot of one-shot soul stuff coming out of there. It was fun because there was a lot of scurrying around. A lot of the big business took place right out on Broadway, outside, and in the City Squire Hotel next door. And there were all these weird characters in the Brill Building itself. During the late 60s, the Brill Building had been converted so that the offices now had all these shag rugs on the wall, this sort of cheesy drug era stuff. Everyone had gumball machines and stuff like that. It was very amazing. Brill Building connections led to a stint playing in Jay and the Americans backing band, opening for the Four Seasons, a really good band. Until a year later, they got the call from Gary Katz and moved out to Los Angeles to work as staff writers for ABC Dunhill. We were terrible pop song writers, he acknowledged with hindsight. They all sounded just like imitations of other pop songs, and the lyrics were always too quirky for anyone to do. The only thing to do, they decided, was to form their own band, get a decent singer, and take it from there. A year later, with 2 hit singles under their belt, Fagen found himself reluctantly ensconced behind the mic, fronting the most sophisticated pop group of them all. We were interested in the kind of hybrid music that included all the music we'd ever listened to, Fagen claims of the Dan's intentions. So there was always a lot of TV music in there and things. It was very eclectic and it used to make us laugh. We knew something was really good if we would really laugh, as it's when we played it back. We never wanted to do any straight humour or satire, though. It was just the different styles that were involved in making it that were funny. We liked the sort of folk looks sound of the 50s. There was just something very funny about it. I grew up in a folk looks household, and it was a very alienated world. So for me, it has the opposite effect. Music is supposed to relax you, but it makes me very anxious. So in a way, I think I get it out of me by putting some of it in my songs. Then I start to laugh at it when I hear it.